Okay, so you sent over some seriously interesting stuff about a pretty wild discovery. We're talking archaeology, pyramids, ancient mysteries, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, this one's a real doozy.
Yeah, right. And it looks like it all stems from an episode of the Vincent Crown Podcast.
That's the one.
Yeah.
They really go deep on this whole thing about these huge structures they found under the Pyramid of Khafre in Egypt.
Right, like under the pyramid. So our mission, if you will, is to break this down for everyone listening.
Right.
We want to understand what exactly was found, why this podcast thinks it's such a big deal, and why it's causing a stir, in both the scientific world and among those who maybe lean towards, let's say, alternative histories.
Exactly. And it's all kind of wrapped up in this really intriguing question that the podcast poses. Like, what if everything we think we know about the pyramids, these iconic symbols of ancient Egypt, is just like the tip of the iceberg?
Right. And this discovery of these massive underground structures is making people, rethink the whole story of Egypt, how they built them, why they built them, all that.
For sure.
So let's jump right in. First things first, the discovery. The podcast is saying that researchers found these enormous structures hidden under the Pyramid of Khafre. I mean, we're not talking about some tiny hidden rooms, are we?
Oh, no, not at all. The podcast describes them as vast subterranean chambers, hidden corridors, and enigmatic artifacts. And they're talking about monumental constructions perfectly aligned.
Hold on. Perfectly aligned?
Yeah, that's what they're saying. Super precise.
And how did they even find these things buried so deep under this giant pyramid? I mean,
Right.
What kind of technology can do that?
So they use something called SAR, which stands for Radar de Apertura Sintética. It's a technology that was originally developed for the military and for space exploration.
Wow.
Basically, they send these electromagnetic waves into the ground, and then they analyze how the waves bounce back. That creates a really detailed picture of what's under the surface, kind of like using sonar to map the ocean floor, but with electromagnetic energy penetrating the Earth.
Oh, I see. So they're basically getting an X-ray of what's underneath the pyramid.
Exactly.
And the podcast is really emphasizing just how big these new spaces are, right?
Yeah, they keep saying that some of these underground areas have colossal dimensions. And they seem to be all connected, forming these long galleries and passageways deep, deep down.
So not just rooms, but a whole underground network.
That's what they're suggesting.
Okay, so we have these huge unknown spaces under the Pyramid of Khafre. And it sounds like the way they're laid out is completely different from anything we've seen inside the pyramid itself.
That's a major point the podcast makes. They're saying the design is totally different from any of the known passages or chambers inside the pyramids.
Meaning this wasn't just an extension of what was already there.
Right. It seems like it had a completely separate purpose.
And they even say it might not have been meant to be accessible, like they weren't just built and left open.
Yeah, the podcast talks about some initial analysis that suggests these structures might have been sealed up right after they were built, intentionally hidden, like a secret.
Oh, wow. So we've got a real mystery on our hands. Big hidden structures built differently, sealed up. I mean, this is stuff Indiana Jones dreams about.
Right. And all of this really makes us think about the historical context here, the Pyramid of Khafre itself. Maybe we should back up a bit for anyone who might not be as familiar with it. Can you give us the rundown?
Absolutely. So the Pyramid of Khafre, it's one of the 3 big pyramids at Giza in Egypt, built for Pharaoh Khafre during the 4th dynasty. We're talking over 4,500 years ago. And for a long time, archaeologists have pretty much seen it as a tomb, meant to ensure the pharaoh's immortality in the afterlife.
The classic view. But even with that explanation, the podcast highlights that there have always been some pretty big questions about the pyramids.
Oh, yeah. How did they build them?
Right, it's mind-boggling. The scale of these constructions is just, it's colossal. The podcast talks about how did they move these stones, these blocks that weigh decenas de toneladas, tens of tons, with the tools they supposedly had back then.
I mean, it's a massive puzzle.
Absolutely. And the podcast brings up this fascinating tidbit about the main chamber inside the Pyramid of Khafre. When they first opened it up back in the 1800s, they found it empty. Empty. No pharaoh, no treasures, nothing. That's always fueled a lot of speculation about what the pyramid was really for.
It makes you wonder. And it's not like this is the first time anyone's tried to look inside these pyramids, right?
Right. The podcast mentions that back in the 20th century, they used things like sonar and ground-penetrating radar, and they actually did find some unexplained chambers and corridors, so the idea of hidden spaces isn't new.
But the size of what they're finding now, that's what's so different.
Yeah, and the way they're designed, it's a whole new ballgame.
Okay, so now we get to the really interesting part, because at this point, the Vincent Crown Podcast takes a turn toward the, let's say, less conventional explanations.
Yeah.
They start talking about this ancient astronauts idea. And for those who might not be familiar, what's the basic idea behind that?
So the ancient astronauts hypothesis basically says that way back in the day, prehistoric times, Earth got a visit from aliens, technologically advanced beings from another planet. And these aliens, they influenced how human civilization developed. They shared their knowledge, technology, even shaped our religions and the way we built things.
Wow. So we're talking about aliens helping build the pyramids.
Well, that's what proponents of this theory suggest.
And the podcast specifically connects the Pyramid of Khafre to this ancient astronaut hypothesis.
They sure do.
So according to the podcast, why does this pyramid fit in so well with this idea of aliens being involved?
Okay, so they make a few arguments. The first is that the pyramids were built with incredible precision, like way more precise than you'd expect from people using, primitive tools.
Right. How did they cut and move those massive stones so precisely? It doesn't really add up.
Exactly. They're talking about tolerances of less than a millimeter on these huge stones. Even with today's tools, that's hard to do. So the podcast is basically saying, how could the ancient Egyptians achieve this level of accuracy without some kind of help from a more advanced civilization?
Okay, so the precision is one thing. What else?
The second point they make is about the astronomical alignment of the Giza pyramids, including Khafre. Yeah, they're aligned with the constellation of Orion, and the podcast is saying that this alignment is way too perfect to be a coincidence. Like, statistically, it's almost impossible. So they suggest that maybe the pyramids were built as some kind of, interstellar marker or a celestial observatory with help from these extraterrestrial visitors.
Wow, that's a wild thought.
It is. And then they bring up ancient texts, both from Egypt and Mesopotamia.
Okay, like hieroglyphs and stuff.
Yeah, and cuneiform tablets, too. And in these texts, they describe beings coming down from the sky, like gods or teachers, who gave humans all this advanced knowledge. The podcast says maybe these stories aren't just myths. Maybe they're actual historical accounts of contact with aliens.
Oh, so instead of just stories, they could be like eyewitness accounts.
Right, exactly. And finally, the podcast points out that there are a lot of similarities between ancient cultures that were really far apart. Like the Egyptians, the Mayans, the Incas, the Sumerians, they all had certain architectural and astronomical things in common, even though they supposedly never met.
Yeah, it's weird how similar some of their stuff is.
Right. So the podcast suggests that maybe, just maybe, they were all influenced by the same extraterrestrial civilization. Like, these aliens were going around spreading their knowledge and technology to different cultures.
So they're painting a picture of these ancient astronauts as like, cosmic teachers or something.
Yeah, kind of.
Okay, so now tie it all back to this new discovery under the Pyramid of Khafre. What does the podcast say all this means, especially in relation to this whole alien theory?
They're basically saying that these underground structures could be the real deal, like tangible evidence that proves the ancient astronauts' hypothesis is right. The fact that these spaces are so huge, so precise, so hidden, it suggests a level of technology that just doesn't fit with what we think the ancient Egyptians knew.
Like they're saying this could rewrite history.
Exactly, and they even suggest that it could change how we understand time. Like, what if these structures are even older than the 4th dynasty? What if there was a civilization here before the Egyptians that was even more advanced?
That's pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah, and the podcast doesn't stop there. They're saying that if this discovery is legit, it could have a huge impact on our culture or society. Like, how would people react to knowing that, we might not be alone in the universe, that maybe we were visited by aliens in the past?
I mean, that would change everything.
Right. And on a more practical level, they're calling for archaeologists to use more advanced tech, like this SAR, to explore other ancient sites around the world. They're saying this discovery could be just the beginning.
So they want to use this tech to find more hidden stuff.
Exactly.
Okay, obviously, a discovery like this, with such a controversial theory attached to it, is going to cause some debate.
Oh, definitely.
And the podcast does talk about the skepticism within the scientific community.
They do.
So what are the arguments from those who are more willing to believe this, who think it might actually be real?
Well, they often bring up how reliable SAR technology is. Experts in radar technology are saying that the shapes and patterns they're seeing can't just be natural rock formations.
So if they're saying it has to be man-made or, I guess, alien-made.
Right. And the podcast also points out that similar discoveries have been made at other ancient sites, like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey and Teotihuacan in Mexico. These findings, they seem to challenge our understanding of what ancient people were capable of.
Like maybe they knew more than we give them credit for?
Exactly. And for those who support this discovery, they're seeing this as a huge opportunity. Like this could be a turning point in how we understand history, how ancient societies were governed, maybe even our ideas about time and space.
It's definitely got the potential to shake things up. But on the flip side, what are the skeptics saying? What are their main arguments against this, as presented in the podcast?
So the skeptics, they often talk about the limitations of SAR. They say that while it's a great tool, it's not perfect. The images it creates can be tricky to interpret, and what looks like a structure could actually just be a weird rock formation.
Especially in a place like Egypt where the geology is so complex.
Right. And they're also stressing the need for actual digging. They're saying, sure, the radar might show something interesting, but you need to get in there, excavate, physically examine it before you can say for sure what it is.
Makes sense. You need that physical proof.
Exactly. And there's another concern they bring up: the danger of sensationalism and pseudoscience. They're worried that these kinds of discoveries, especially when you connect them to theories like ancient astronauts, can generate a lot of hype, but not a lot of solid science.
Like it can overshadow the real, careful work that archaeologists are doing.
Yeah, that's the worry.
It's tricky, right? You want to be open to new possibilities, but also stay grounded in facts.
It is tough balance.
And then the Vincent Crown Podcast goes into this whole thing about the Hall of Records.
Oh, yeah.
So first of all, what is that?
The Hall of Records, it's this legendary mythical place. Supposedly, it's a library hidden somewhere underground, and it's filled with the knowledge of a civilization that existed way before any we know about.
Like a lost library of ancient secrets.
Right. And it's been a source of fascination for people who are into, alternative history and esoteric stuff for a long time.
So where does this idea even come from? Where did the podcast find it?
They trace it back to Edgar Cayce, that American psychic from the early 1900s. He talked a lot about a hidden library in Egypt, somewhere under the sands, maybe near the pyramids. He called it the Hall of Records.
And what's supposed to be inside this legendary library?
Well, Cayce said it was filled with scrolls and manuscripts and artifacts. All kinds of knowledge about the true origins of humanity, forgotten technologies, and records of aliens visiting Earth in the past.
Like the history of everything.
Pretty much.
So what do actual archaeologists think about this Hall of Records?
Well, most of them think it's a myth.
A myth.
Yeah, they say there's no real evidence to support it.
But the podcast is saying that some people see a connection between these new underground discoveries and this Hall of Records idea, right?
Right. They're saying maybe these structures under the Pyramid of Khafre, or maybe that's part of it. The fact that they're so big, so hidden, maybe they were built to protect this ancient knowledge.
So they're saying, what if this isn't just a coincidence? What if this really is the Hall of Records?
Yeah, that's the question they're posing.
And if it were to be real, what would that mean?
The podcast suggests it would be one of the biggest discoveries ever.
Bigger than, like, finding King Tut's tomb.
Way bigger. They're talking about knowledge that could change everything. Science, technology, medicine, maybe even how long we can live.
Wow.
And the podcast also criticizes the way that mainstream scientists often dismiss these kinds of ideas. They say we should be more open-minded, more willing to investigate, even if something seems crazy at first.
Like, don't just shut it down without looking into it.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's a lot to unpack. We've got these huge hidden structures under the Pyramid of Khafre, possibly built with technology we don't understand, possibly connected to aliens, possibly part of this mythical Hall of Records.
It's a lot, for sure.
And now you, our listeners, you have a really good understanding of what's being reported, why people are so excited about it, but also why some are skeptical.
And that's important, to see both sides of the argument.
Absolutely. And I think the biggest takeaway from all of this is that question the podcast asks at the end. Why are we so quick to dismiss things that seem impossible? Like, what if we're wrong about what we think we know? What if there are secrets out there, buried right under our feet, that could completely change our understanding of history, of humanity, of everything? This discovery, whether it turns out to be exactly what the podcast says or not, it makes us think, it makes us wonder what else is out there waiting to be found. And maybe, just maybe, we need to be a little more open-minded about what's possible.
Couldn't agree more. It's exciting to think about, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
And who knows, maybe one day we'll uncover even more evidence that challenges everything we thought we knew.
Well, folks, that's another deep dive for you. And as always, thanks for joining us.
Until next time.
See you then.